Files are the lifeblood of business, and your employees will open the files they need to do their jobs, whether they're safe or not. With Votiro, your employees will only open files that are safe. Votiro applies zero trust principles to files and sanitizes every incoming file for your organization. Known and unknown threats are removed instantly, and the file retains full functionality, so your business is safe and productivity never slows down. And it's not just for email. The Votiro Cloud API works on web downloads, file uploads, cloud apps, FTP, and content collaboration portals. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Votiro. Mimecast has released its State of Ransomware Readiness Report for 2022, finding that most cybersecurity leaders experience the same or increasing numbers of ransomware attacks over last year. Together with Mimecast, organizations can stand strong in the face of cyber attacks, human error, technical failure, and work protected. Mimecast. Work protected. Visit securityweekly.com/Mimecast to learn more. Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jeff Mann and Ryan Morris. Security Weekly listeners save $100 on their RSA Conference 2023 full conference pass. RSA Conference will take place April 24th to 27th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using our discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC 2023 and use the discount code 53UCyber. We hope to see you there. All right, gentlemen, articles for the week. Now, Jeff, you've been on here before. Ryan, you're new. So typically in this segment, we're going to talk through different leadership and communication articles, primarily because we cover enough security news on all the other podcasts. This show has always stayed more focused on leadership and communication skills. And there's a couple interesting articles that I pulled in that are related to the previous conversation we just had with Jeff Pollard, right? In that there's really some interesting evolution of the CISO role. So this first article I pulled in is from the Cloud Security Alliance, and this was some research done in Europe. It came out of the Italian working group, and they're building a CISO responsibilities matrix, which I thought was interesting. So I pulled this article in because they published an initial kind of report based on some of their findings, looking at the CISO role, understanding who's responsible for what in the European market, and then kind of mapping out the different skill levels, etc. Not a huge amount of numbers, which is okay. But there's just a couple things. I linked the report, I think, in the notes. If not, I'll do it right after this. But when you look at some of the findings, the first one that kind of just blew me out of my chair, the average CISO salary in Europe is about 96,000 euros per year, which seems kind of low to me compared to what CISOs are getting paid here in the States. That was just a really interesting outlier. That number just seemed a little low. Obviously got a little higher based on years of experience, but overall seems to be well under kind of the US market when it comes to salary. The other one was the reporting structure, where the majority reported to the CIO in Europe, which we just had this conversation with Jeff about this, where it was about 50-50. I mean, this is overwhelmingly CIO reporting for that CISO role in Europe.
Well, and that might be, Matt, because those two bullet points or data points might be indicators that Europe is behind the U.S. in terms of the evolution of the role, if not all things technology and IT related in general. I would be remiss if I did not bring up PCI for a moment, as I am wont to do on the main show. PCI is a global standard and PCI operates in Europe, and in some ways, PCI has never gotten the type of traction in Europe as it has in the U.S. But part of the reason is because Europe very cleverly uses, like chip and pin instead of chip and signature. And their technology in terms of payments is much further advanced. So I think there's at least from a perspective in the payments industry, that the technology has really got everything covered and you don't have to worry as much about it. So maybe the role isn't as necessary. And that's just one small observation that could be way off base, but and it's counterintuitive to maybe Europe's behind or maybe Europe's advanced all at the same time.
See, I was talking to a CEO a couple of years ago, and I said,
Maybe.
well, what is the job description of the CEO? What is it you actually do and add to the organization? And his comment to me was, well, we tell stories. We're here to establish messages. We are the standard bearer for the organization, both to the employees, to the customers, and to the investment community, right? And he said, but if you really want to know what a CEO believes, just look at where he puts his money. And whatever stories he tells, whatever, newfangled spin might come out on any of these things, look at where the budget goes, and that will tell you what they believe is actually important. And I agree with you, Matt. I think that's an alarmingly low number. And what it says to me just diagnostically is, oh, so you don't think that cybersecurity is a material contributing factor to the success of your organization. I think that might be a rude surprise they're about to get when they have some unfortunate things. But I find it really ironic in the sense that, Jeff, as you're mentioning, when I look at it from a regulatory point of view, I think Europe is several steps ahead of what we've agreed to over here in the States. They have much more forward-thinking intentions on controlling information security, but they're not putting their money where their mouth is yet. So I think that's a very interesting conundrum.
Paradox.
Well, if you think about GDPR and privacy being the big driver over there, and then you see these CISO levels, and you're just like, well, wait a minute. It doesn't make sense. Why is the CISO reporting to the CIO at a different pay structure that's under maybe considered under market value if privacy and security of data and GDPR are so important? Maybe it's the chief data officer or privacy officer that actually is more in control in Europe. So it'd be interesting to compare like the CISO versus the CDO versus the CPO maybe in Europe to see where is the money being spent? Because if GDPR is a driver and security is not the driver, it's got to be another role.
Mm-hmm. I have a quick question. I'd be interested in both of your thoughts on this. I attended an event last fall. Actually, it was 2 falls ago, where I was on a college campus, and it was a gathering of a whole bunch of different community college, small colleges, trying to figure out how to train and educate students, coming out of college to be better equipped for cyber. And the college that was hosting us, we had a luncheon, and there was a student from their cybersecurity major at each of the tables. And so I was chatting with the student representative at my table, and they commented there. I was like, well, what do you want to do when you grow up? And they're like, my goal is to become a CISO. And I was kind of like, why? But their perception that is the top of the career ladder is CISO, and I'm just curious, what's if not the top of the ladder, where does CISO rank in terms of the pecking order of career path and in this field from your guys' perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we've actually talked about it on this show, because once you're at the CISO level, what's next for you, right?
Right.
And we've talked about what is a potential transition for the CISO in the role to, maybe a CEO, maybe. Again, you're going to have to be a pretty well CEO-aligned CISO with the business skills to move into a CEO role. You can move into chief technology officer. So there were a few different places, because I don't think CISO is the end-all, be-all role necessarily, Jeff. I don't think it should be for most people, but when people think about security, they think, all right, I start out as an analyst and then I go and become a manager and a director, and the logical ladder takes me to the CISO role, and that's the pinnacle. I don't know if it is. Maybe for some people it is, but I had this inflection point in my career right before I joined Tenable, Jeff. I had a decision I had to make. Was I going to go internal and take a CISO path role and go that way? Or was I going to stay on the vendor side? And I ended up going to Tenable, and that was the right choice for me. But no two paths are the same. And to be a CISO has a very specific kind of like, you got to put the time inside an organization to build up that skill set. And that's not really where I wanted to focus. And I think everybody has to figure out, where do they want to focus their careers?
See, and my perspective is, I think it has an awful lot to do
Brian,
with
thoughts?
the business model of that end user organization, right? If you think about it, if the business for whom you are a CISO is in manufacturing, transportation, logistics, energy production, it is necessary, and CISO might be the pinnacle of that stack, as they are, deeper science on the other business critical functions. But if your employer is a software developer, an infrastructure provider, then I think Matt's exactly right. You are on a direct path to be the CEO, because I think, especially in a modern world where coding is becoming low code, no code, even generative code, I don't think building software functions is going to be the most difficult thing a software company has to do in their job. The most difficult thing they will do is protect data, protect customer interest and information, and create that trust and confidence in the marketplace. So I think it has a lot to do with where you work. Right now, historically, it has been the biggest job that a security professional could get, because historically, security professionals were not perceived to be business assets. They were perceived to be a functional provider. That's changing. And as everybody wants to say these days, every company is a technology company because nobody can do their jobs without technology. Okay, well, I would think that means everybody's job, every company is a technology security company, because it's cool if you have good software, but if it's not secure, thanks, I'm not driving that.
Interesting you brought up business, because now that we've figured out the CISO role, transitioning to your next story, Matt, now we have to talk about the BISO role, Business Information Security Officers.
Right. Well, and we've also debated this on this show. Is in this article, it talks about the rise of the role of the BISO. And one of the conversations Jason and Ben and I had early on, because I asked Ben straight up, like, what's a BISO role to you? Is a BISO your deputy CISO? And he said, no, that's not how I view it. Now, this article seems to think that it's an extension of the CISO, almost like a deputy CISO role.
Right.
Ben's spin on the BISO role was somebody from the business that was the interface into the security team and didn't necessarily report into security. So this role is interesting because some see it as a security role interfacing with the business, where others see it as business roles interfacing with security. And so what does the BISO role kind of evolve into? This one was more of, it's an extension of the CISO. Ben would argue with you that it may not be in certain organizations.
Mm-hmm. It's one of these rare articles where I actually know some of the people that are quoted in it. Like I know Alyssa Miller, and she transitioned from a CISO type role to a BISO role. It happened right after RSA last year, which was in June. So she's been in the new role less than a year. I haven't caught up with her to see how how the role's going, but my take on when she was telling me that she was taking the new role was kind of almost like a bridge, or a synthesis of your perceived coming up from the technology side of things or the security type of things, and the top is the CISO role, but then there's like the business and whatever type of business is, the business, and you're coming up in the normal management ranks getting up into the executive path, and the BISO seemed to be like the convergence of the two, or a bridge between the two, which I don't necessarily agree that you need to have a separate title for that. You ought to be able to be all things to all people with whatever title you have, but yeah, if it works for some organizations, I guess that's okay.
So I'm always fascinated by the latest version of business cliches that are intended to oversimplify an otherwise very important topic. Data is the new crude oil of business, right? It's the raw material from which we refine insights and information that we can exploit in the marketplace. Your business is its data. Well, if that's true, then the BISO role is at least as senior as the CISO role, if not, ironically, even more so. I think of it as whoever owns the database of customer information for marketing purposes, whoever owns all of your product data and drawings for your engineering team, anything that is IP related in your business. If you cannot harness it, analyze it, and then, oh, by the way, make sure that it doesn't get leaked and make sure it doesn't get corrupted from a security perspective. If you can't do that, then it's just a puddle of oil, right? Like I think that's where this becomes a very important conversation, is the rest of the business has to become much more data savvy.
Yeah, I was going to say in a similar light, Ryan, right? The BISO role is an interesting transition role in a couple directions. I think it could be used this way. One is someone from the business side who wants to get into security. This role potentially allows them to bring their business skill set to learn security and move into the role. I think it could also be a bridge for a CISO to move into a business unit function, like a chief operating officer or potentially other roles, including the CEO, right? Where it is a role that can be used to transition people out of security over to the business. And so that's why I said it depends on who you ask what the BISO role is, because it can be used in either direction, which I think is unique. And since we're talking business, then we should be talking about what the new financial metric for cybersecurity should be, because if we are business aligned, then things like revenue should matter to security. We shouldn't be considered a cost center. So this next article actually talks about, what are some of those new metrics, and you got to read the whole thing to get to meet of this, right? It's the last paragraph. Where it really gets into CISOs need to reframe this narrative as a profit center. A strong security culture actively increases customer lifetime value. Think about that, right? We were talking a little bit about this with Jeff Pollard in the previous segment. Third-party risk, supply chain, being part of the demo and the conversation, being more business focused because it's about customer lifetime value. Very interesting metric. Are we actually tracking ourselves this way? And then obviously top line revenue, because brand, trust, and obviously reducing some of the potential impact of a breach is also something that's very interesting. But how many CISOs actually think about their metrics that way?
I'm torn between commenting or not.
I nailed it? All right.
I have all, what was Ryan just saying about buzzwords? Talking about the security department as a profit center. I don't know how much makeup you put on or lipstick you put on the pig. It's still a pig. Maybe it's a mindset, maybe it's a frame of mind or an attitude. But to my way of thinking, everything you do in security is comes at a cost, and the hope is you're reducing. Well, I summarize it this way very often. In terms of risk, organizations are mostly for-profit companies. The risk is twofold. One is the ability to generate income, which is what they're in business to do. create profit. And the second one is how much does it cost to do that? And both of those are tied together in security, and whether it's whether it's threat related, whether it's vulnerability related, whether it's security mitigation related, whatever it is that you're trying to do costs something. Are there things that are more cost effective than others? Yes. Is there a balancing act? Absolutely. But I have a hard time thinking, I'm willing to be proven wrong, but I have a hard time believing that a security organization can be spun up to be a profit center.
I'll just jump in and make the observation that I don't think any of these costs are ever able to be analyzed in isolation, right? It's like if you drive a really good car and it has a very powerful engine and it has great gas mileage and it has great security and safety technology, what's the ROI of air in your tires, right? It's an illogical thing to try and analyze the direct financial impact, but it is necessary to analyze the contribution to all of these metrics. We've been talking about this a lot over on the other show where I do stuff in cyber for hire, and we talk about it from from a service provider perspective. We spend a lot of time saying, how do you get an audience with the business side of the house? How do you get the CEO to take you seriously as a service provider? And it always comes down to, you better speak their language. And in all cases, that is attached to metrics. And so my advice is, what is your contribution to lifetime value, to customer acquisition, to customer retention and churn rates? What is your contribution to customer expansion based on trust and confidence? And so that's kind of where I think it goes. It's never going to be, we're not in business to be secure, but if we're not secure, we're not in business. So it becomes a component factor.
Well, and I think it's very subjective as well. And it's not just whatever type of business you're in. It's the corporate culture. It's the personality of the executive leadership. You used a car as an analogy. Again, back when I first started out in the private sector back in the late 90s, trying to convince people, companies, well, if you're going to plug into the internet, A, you really need a firewall, and B, you really need to think about security and what you're trying to protect. Everybody wanted to spend as little as possible. And everybody that I went to, especially in the early days of my involvement with PCI, they wanted to know, well, what are our competitors doing in this field? How much are they spending? I don't want to spend any more or less. I want to be in the middle so that when we get breached, we won't be regarded as being negligent. But the analogy I used is, and I don't know if this product is still made or not, but you remember the club, the thing that you'd hook to your steering wheel to protect your car? I would compare and contrast. You own a $100,000 car, and you want to spend $100 on the club to protect it, to keep it, from being stolen. You could go on to the pros and cons of whether that's effective or not, whether you're spending enough, whether it's going to work or not, what your threats are, who's going to go after that $100,000 car. But then on the other hand, or the other end of the spectrum, say you're a college kid and you're working your way through college and you're delivering pizzas. Of course, this was in the 90s. You're doing what, DoorDash now? You're the gig economy. You're driving for Uber. Take your pick. Now, Uber's not a good example because you have to have a decent car. But say you're driving a clunker. Say you're driving your grandfather's car that he sold to you for $500, but you're using it to get to and from school and to and from work so that you can make a living and get ready to participate in the dream. $100 for a club, that's a lot of money for you. And again, it's the same investment, it's the same security solution, but is it enough? Is it too much? And what it boils down to a lot of times is is really, this whole idea of risk and security is an emotion. It's a feeling. Do I feel good about myself? Can I sleep at night because I think I've done enough, but not too much? Have I spent enough, but not too much? That's why another reason why I sort of chuckle at metrics, because metrics are what you make them out to be. And at the end of the day, the person that's selling you on the matrix is also trying to sell you on whatever it is that they're selling you ultimately.
So you're going to love this next article, Jeff, right? Because security and this one's trying to help us solve the people problem. And two of the three things on here, you just almost kind of negated a little bit. I mean, not fully, but the business value of cybersecurity. Well, if there isn't one, well, that one's out the window. And then again, if you're only going to spend the bare minimum, then allocating all the resources you need to solve this problem probably is not going to happen either, which means the only thing left for this article is to create a good security culture, which is still a big challenge for most organizations.
Well, sorry if I blew up one of your articles, Matt, but on the topic of getting people in the business, the shortage, I have often thought that, and this is coming from my background where I used to work for the DoD, where not only was our culture all about security, it was kind of our job, which is somewhat unique, but I believe that we don't need more people that are highly trained in cybersecurity or security or whatever we want to call it. I think everybody in the organization needs to be well trained and educated on security and its role and its impact on their job function and how their job function could potentially impact the overall security of the organization through action or inaction. And that, I think, is part of at least part of the definition of a culture of cybersecurity. But if everybody knew not to click on certain things, we wouldn't have to spend so much money on our annual awareness training that just teaches us how not to fall to the fish. And I bring that up again because that's the latest fad in cybersecurity awareness training, whereas for the first 15, 20 years, it was all about how to pick strong passwords. And of course, now that we've solved that problem of the weak password, we're moving on to bigger and better things, like how do we prevent the fish? There's more to security than those two things.
Which is why security awareness and training programs struggle too, because now it's not just about security awareness and training, it's security awareness and training participation rates with phishing click rates, and that's not enough to solve the human risk problem, which is what you were alluding to, Jeff. This is a human problem.
Well, and this is the thing, right? It's not just about having good tools, and it's not just about having good training. It is, the culture is based on buy-in. In other words, it's not whether or not we have the awareness, the information, and the skill to behave correctly in the environment. It's whether we care enough to try, because it will require us to learn some things, stay a little bit more savvy. There's effort involved, whether I'm a sales rep or somebody in accounting and finance or somebody on the front line of manufacturing. My job gets just a little bit more challenging if I also incorporate my self-accountability for cybersecurity. People have to want to do that. They actually have to agree, feel emotionally attached, think it's a good thing. We always say, the one thing that will absolutely ensure you do not have a security-centric culture is to yell at people about cybersecurity. Right? To scold them, to embarrass them, to punish them for not doing it correctly. Well, all that makes me do, the teenage boy in me, right? Inevitably, if you do that to me, my reaction is going to be, oh, really? You think I can't get away with things? Let me show you, right? That's terribly immature, but it's unbelievably common across business cultures. If you force people, if you punish them, if you embarrass them in front of their friends because they did it incorrectly, you're never going to get a culture to buy in. My baseline philosophy is software will never solve this problem. There must be good software. There must be competent professionals who implement and manage that software. But there also has to be a willing environment of participants, because you hire 1,000 cybersecurity professionals and you still cannot account for every accidental or deliberate act of defiance that says, you can't force me to do that if I don't agree with you.
So what I hear you saying is that the insider threat is growing.
Yes, it is. It absolutely is growing, and we're causing it to grow by alienating people and telling them, and Matt, you touched on it, right? We refer to it as, well, are humans the weak link? Are humans the problem? Are humans the bad thing in cybersecurity? Well, all that terminology is going to do is make the humans look at us and go, I don't want to talk to that guy. I will avoid every message he ever sends to me.
Right. But we have to understand that.
Yeah, that's not really a good way to build bridges.
Yeah, I was going to say, we have to understand that the human is not only an element of cybersecurity, it is also a very emotional element of cybersecurity. Yes. We've got...
Well, and that goes all the way back
Yes.
to war games in 1983.
Let's cover off these last couple articles pretty quick. This next one is to talk about curbing burnout. And Ryan, you hit on a couple pieces about this, right? Around cynicism and some of the other things, right? I mean, if you look at where the sources of mismatches are, which is what I took out of this article, how do you align on some of these mismatch areas that would stop burnout? And I think we can use some of this to actually help us from a cybersecurity perspective. If we're rewarding people instead of punishing them, then maybe I change behaviors in a positive way so that they actually take ownership of cybersecurity and do a better job versus, just always using the stick mentality, right? So I think there's some good lessons in this article that we could use ourselves when it comes to not only just general team burnout, but just how do we have to think about employees as a whole to get what we want them to do out. Anyways, there was a very good tie into your last discussion.
Well, and I will go so far as to say there's two layers of burnout, and you've touched on the one with the end user, the actual employee who's needs to be brought along willingly, right? But also the human in the chair, the one who's responsible for this. We've been tracking a lot of data around the emotional state and the devastating burnout that happens to people who are managing hundreds, if not thousands, of alerts a day with the 100 versus 0 stakes of the game they're in. You either got hacked and ruined the business today, or you didn't, right? These are the only two outcomes. And when people live in that every single day, it's not sustainable, right? So we talked to a guy who's a CISO who came from actually the Navy SEALs, right? He had actually been a SEAL. He was responsible for the technology posture of the SEALs as an operating division. And he said, you don't see Navy SEALs on the front lines 365 days in a row. It absolutely cannot be sustained that way. They go in for very intense periods of time and they do what they're best at doing. And then they come out of the theater so that they can rest, recuperate, and not go crazy. And then they are replaced by somebody else. And so if you can cycle people like that, you drastically reduce their chances of just throwing up their hands and going, screw it, I quit, I'm out of here. That we already don't have enough of these humans. We can't afford to be breaking them.
Yes. Agreed. And the last article, when more is less. I'm going to leave it at that. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.